Hey guys, Michael and Peter back. We are out on site. So this is Michael's potential development site. All right, you have to forgive my amateur usage of the gimbal here. So hopefully the camera is mostly in the right place. So what we're out here to do is a couple of things. Number one, what we want to see is what are we actually working with here? What potential limitations could there be in the development of this site? The thing with development is it's often what's below the ground or what's structurally in place or not in place that limits your development. Town planning is one thing. It's all well and good if the town plan says you can develop the thing, but if you can't service it, or if there are other services in the way of where you need to put things, then instead of being able to get 3 lots, maybe you can only get 2 lots. Now, that's one thing we're looking at, and also then that way we can update our feasibility, because we're going to look at things that potentially could cost more than what we might have not necessarily expected prior. We also want to spend some time here actually getting a feel for what this neighbourhood is like, because we want to walk in the buyer's shoes. This is one thing that people very often get wrong, is they do their like a desktop analysis of what their stuff is going to sell for. That's where you start. That's definitely not where you finish or where you make decisions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. You need to get out, you need to walk around, you need to feel what the neighbourhood's like. Have a look. What is this road like? What are the neighbouring properties like? Are they renovated? What is the standard kind of fence that they've got? Is it colour bond? Is it chain wire fence? Is it timber fence? Are they asbestos roofs? Are they tile roofs? Are they colour bond roofs? What condition are the houses in? What does it actually feel like? If you were the buyer and you're picturing living here, what's life going to look like for you? Because that's what they're going to be thinking when they walk around to all these different places and actually have a look at which one that they want to buy. So that's what we need to do. We need to walk in the buyer's shoes and feel what this property is like compared to the comparable sales. So I've mentioned fencing. Let's have a look at the fencing. Actually, before I do that, Michael, give us a quick rundown on this property. What is it? How many bed, how many bath? Is there a bit of a story to it?
It's just a pretty basic 3-bed, 2-bath house. Not much to look at, but it's in a good location with trains, shops nearby, good access to main roads. I think that's the main thing that's really going for it. But other than that, the house itself is pretty basic.
Awesome. Okay. So if we have a look up here, let's have a look at the fencing we've got in place on site at the moment. So clearly that's going to go, that's not going to cut the mustard when you develop this and try and get maximum dollar for it. Now, there is some colour bond fencing in the area. Have a look behind me, that property over the road. That's not enough to suggest you should do colour bond fencing. Colour bond fencing is much more expensive than a 6-foot timber fence. So you're not going to keep the chain wire fencing, so you would upgrade to 6-foot timber fence. Definitely don't need to go to the extra expensive colour bond. You're not going to get your money back for that unless that is the norm and therefore the expectation in the area. Now, the other thing I would say is with fencing, when you do subdivisions, you don't need to put fences in between all of your new blocks. Bunting will do for that. That's just a visual to show them where the boundary is. You just want to put a fence surrounding the development to basically present it nicely. So when we look here, we would put a colour bond fence down the middle, down here, and I'm going to guess we're going to need the same on the other side, but dividing blocks, if we divide them, we would just put bunting. Now, the other things I'm looking at here, have a look where the power's coming from. You can see, let's go to overhead power lines over here, and you can see cables coming in. And the same for this house here. You can see behind me here, above, that's where the power's coming in. Pole across the road, and then overhead power coming in. Now, does that mean that we're going to be allowed to maintain overhead power? Not necessarily, unfortunately. Now, why would we want to maintain it? It's much cheaper. Running a wire from an existing pole to your house and to your new blocks, much, much cheaper. You've got to go underground. If the electricity is only on the other side of the street, there's nothing on our side, that means we've got to bring the electricity underneath the road and over to this side. So we've got a tunnel bore, or we've got to open up the road, and we've got to put in our green buoys on this side of the road. Much more expensive process. As soon as you've got to cross the road, you're looking at least 20 grand extra for your electricity. But these days it's pretty standard. Not a lot of councils are loving keeping power overhead. They're wanting it to go underground. So in most cases, they're going to make you put it underground. Now, the other things we want to have a look for on the footpath is other services and utilities that might be in the way of where we need to put services and utilities or driveways. So just having a look around, noting that, okay, we've got a pram ramp here. Okay, that's a consideration. We've also got this beauty here. Now, I'm actually not 100% sure what that is. That's something to investigate. Given it's a V, I'm going to go with voltage, but I could be wrong. I haven't actually come across that one before. So what I definitely want to know is where are the fire hydrants? It's a couple of reasons. One, their location may prohibit us from doing certain things. But the other thing is we may need to add a fire hydrant, which again, if you do need to, 20, 25 grand to do it. Now, when do you need to do it? That may be different in different areas. In this area here, you've got to be 80, or the frontage of your property needs to be within 80 metres. Sorry, actually, the entirety of the property, I think from memory, has to be within 80 metres of a fire hydrant. Now, why? Okay, how do you find fire hydrants? You look for the blue reflector on the road, and that's going to show you where it is, because that's what the fire is looking for when they come out to site. So they get a call, they're driving along. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing they probably have some sort of system that tells them where they are. But then visually, they are looking for a blue reflector in the middle of the road. At least that's the norm in Queensland. And then there'll be an arrow pointing to which side of the road it is. I can see one up here. So obviously I'm talking to the camera, but this is me talking to Michael at the same time. This is all new info for him too. So we've got a blue reflector in the middle of the road with an arrow pointing over there and a yellow marking on the other side of the road. Now, what is very common in these older areas, let's see if it's true here. We have a look down on the ground. Can you see a fire hydrant? We're looking for like a metal lid. I can't. Very common in these older areas that they've just been grown over. Just a little tip, you actually can report that to your local council. Actually, Michael's found it. Yep, so it was overgrown, but not too bad. So that's what we're looking at, FH. And they're normally covered in yellow paint. But yeah, if they are actually covered over, you can just report that. That's not a negative thing, because if the fireys come out here, those precious seconds to locate the fire hydrant can be pretty important. They are meant to be visible at all times for obvious safety reasons. We'll go and check out the other one. So that one there would easily take care of any frontages that we create here. Now, let's see if there's one down here as well. And you'll also notice that I'm ducking a fair bit, so that we've got a fair few trees around here. Now this is something Michael's already done a bit of investigating into. You always want to be sure you know what tree, if there are any trees that need to stay. Now, if they are on the footpath, they are a council asset. So there is a process where you can apply to remove them. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll be approved, so you need to consider that in terms of driveway locations. So yeah, anything on the footpath is a council asset. They literally have an asset number in their system. If you get rid of one of those without asking, you can get fined, and they can be substantial. Another blue reflector just down there, and I can see another one down there. Now that one down there is way too far away, but this one over here, yeah, so this property is well serviced by fire hydrants. We've got no issue there. Okay, we have a look down on the ground here. We can see a curb adapter. So that's the stormwater solution for this existing house. So the existing stormwater solution is just coming to curb and channel, which makes perfect sense, because if we step out here for a second and you have a look at the natural flow of land, you can see that the block slopes towards the street, which is what we want to see. When the block slopes away from the street, then you've got the question, how are you getting the water off your site? You might need to fill, which means you probably need to retain. That can be very expensive. Or if it's steep enough, you may need permission from a neighbour to go through their property to the street below them. They are under no obligation to give you that permission. So one, they may not give it to you. Two, if they do give it to you, they could charge you whatever they want. So just be very mindful of that. Is you are responsible for getting the water off your site, and you need to provide evidence during your application process to council as to how you're going to do that. Now, there are tenants in the property at the moment, so we actually can't get in, but something you can see is there is an old timber retaining wall up there. The likelihood is that would probably need to be replaced with concrete sleeper. Now, fortunately, it's not a very high one. If you're below 1 metre, that makes life very easy. It doesn't need to be engineered. As soon as you go above 1 metre, then you need it engineered. Things get a bit more expensive. It's not horrific, but it's an additional expense. So when you can keep retaining walls below 1 metre, that is ideal. Now, we've actually got 6-foot timber fence up the back here, but if we're replacing that retaining wall, that fence is going to need to be replaced as well. And obviously we can notice vegetation here as well. Now, we have done searches. None of it is protected. So that's good news. If it was, that could be challenging. So based on the records, there is no issues removing these trees, which is, pardon me, something you definitely need to check. But you've got to be mindful of what's on site when you put in an application, because they can change their mind once you put in the application. So if you're within your rights, it's often advisable to remove these things before serving it up, giving the opportunity for council to change their mind.
By the way, if I look like a midget, that's just because Pete is literally 6'6" tall.
Okay, now while we're not necessarily going to locate the sewer services, we've done the dull before you dig, we know where the services are, but what I'm still interested in here is what's the slope of the land, because, no pun intended, shit doesn't go uphill. So you need to be able to look at this logically and go, if I flush a toilet on this block, where's it going? Something that's often forgotten. Now, it's not necessarily as simple as, is this land higher or lower than, the footpath. It's also up to the depth of the sewer. So that's something to consider as well, because even if this looked a bit dicey on top here, if the sewer is 3 meters down, then you're fine. But these are just all things you've got to consider. Water's pressurized in this area, so it can go uphill. That's fine. Now, the other thing we need to look at here is there is a decent, it may not show it so much on the camera, but from here, as we move down this direction, there's a decent slope. So, well, I shouldn't call it a slope, it's only a few degrees, but if you're wanting blocks of land to appeal to everyone, and you're wanting the broadest buyer market, or broadest buyer base, ideally you want flat blocks, because a project builder just wants flat blocks. So the moment you have blocks of land where project builders are not interested, you've just narrowed your buyer base. Now, would it be much for a project builder to bench and retain this? No, but if you do it, that objection is removed and it's just done. You're serving up a ready product. So I would allow for some slight benching and slight retaining in this back area here potentially. Just depends if we're doing 2 or 3 lots. If we're only doing it into 2, maybe not necessary, because they could go for different building options here as to how they choose to build into the land. If we were to try and split it into 3, then I'd say it might be worth it. But that's a call we can make once we get a survey, once we actually have a look at engineering plans. But it's just something to consider at this point, that while we are definitely going to look at doing this retaining wall over here, we may also look at benching and retaining the blocks as well. So we've got that perfectly flat product, which is going to appeal to everyone in the market. So with this project, there is the question of what do we do with the house? So do we keep the house? Do we just sell it as it is? Do we renovate it and sell it? Do we renovate it and keep it? Do we improve it? Do we raise it? Do we build in underneath? Like these are all questions that come up when you look at these projects. On my first project, my mind was exploding with all of these possibilities of what I thought I could do. All of them could be done, but here's a golden rule: keep it simple. Get in, get out, get paid, make the project as fast as possible. In terms of wealth creation, velocity is your key. You don't want to turn a 12 to 18 month project into a 2.5 to 3 year project for the sake of squeezing out a little bit more. Get your money out, go again. So with this one here, I wouldn't even entertain raising it or doing anything like that. This is definitely an affordable area, in brackets these days, but quotations, sorry. So it's not somewhere where you're going to see a huge premium by raising it and turning this into a primo property. So it's really a question of, is it something that Michael wants to retain? Is it something he wants to sell? Is it something that he wants to renovate and sell? You tend to maximize your investment if you do renovate it, or at least tart it up a bit, a cosmetic renovation. But I certainly wouldn't recommend anything substantial. So as you can see, it's quite tired. But the thing you've got to be careful in this area is most of the properties around here are quite tired. So have a look around. So you'd have to be very careful not to overcapitalize in this area. If you were to turn this property into an amazing, amazing, beautiful property, you're not going to get your money back on that. You're just not. So you've got to have a look at what are things actually selling for that are unrenovated versus what are they selling for renovated. And then also take in all of the factors, and the fact that, okay, we are on a thoroughfare. We're not in a perfectly quiet back street. Corner block, great for development, but in terms of a house being on a corner block, that's typically seen as a downer because you don't have as much privacy. You've got 2 frontages. So if anything, my thoughts here are a slight tart up and then on sell, but that's up to Michael and his portfolio and what he's wanting to look at there. And even, could he be bothered doing a cosmetic renovation? That's another consideration.
Michael, it's all time and effort.
What are your thoughts?
Well there, but it is a tired house. I did do a cosmetic reno when I first bought it. So really, with the state that it's in, I mean, it's livable now, but how much more work is it going to need later? That's the big question. And I think overcapitalising is the thing to be keeping in mind here. And it's just, at least for the time and effort and money that'll need to go into it, at this stage, I don't see it being worth it.
Yep. No, that's fair enough too. And the thing too, you also need to think about whenever you're doing this project is, what's the market like at the moment? If the market is hot, the thing is, if the market is hot, you want to get out as fast as possible. There's this human nature that our emotion gets involved. We think, oh, the market's hot, it's moving. The longer I wait, the more I will get. Yeah, okay, true for a while, but then when the market turns, it tends to turn fairly quickly. So, you know, as Warren Buffett said, when others are fearful, buy. When others are greedy, sell. So in a hot market, people are being greedy. So if the mood is hot and you can exit well without touching it or without doing much, that's often a smart play. You don't necessarily want to stay in there for another 6 months. You know, put another $50,000, $100,000 into it, because if the market turns over that period, you may not get that money back. And remember, velocity is key.
Especially with a subpar property, it'll be much harder to get rid of as soon as that sentiment changes just a little bit.
Exactly. And that's the thing, as soon as the market shifts, it's properties that are on a main road, on a main thoroughfare. All of these things that in a hot market people just ignore. But the moment the market turns, they are the first properties just to sit on the market and wait and wait and wait. And remember, time, get that money out. There's that opportunity cost. What else could you be doing with that money? So if Michael can exit well on this without even touching it, possibility. Look, I think on this one, it's probably at least worth like a paint job or whatever it is, like spruce it up a little bit, because, you know, maybe spending $20,000, $30,000 on it, you could probably realize a significant premium compared to what it is now, but definitely not going, you know, hard at it. So I think that's pretty much all we need to see here. So the next thing we're going to do is look at comparables. So the key things we want to remember here when we look at the comparables is, all right, this area is a bit tired. All right, it's not a primo area. So when we go looking at our comparables, if we're looking at places that are in really nice areas, the properties around it are renovated, maybe there's even some brand new properties from other subdivisions, that's not comparable. We need to consider that. Thoroughfare, I think I already mentioned. I think that's really the key thing. So we've got to, I guess, kind of stick in a bottle what it feels like to be here and take that around with us. Let's see how we go with that. See you soon.
We're going to Piccadilly Street, which is a vacant 300 square metre block that sold in March of this year. There might be a house on it now, I don't know, but that sold for 450 grand. A corner block, so it should be comparable somewhat.
Same suburb?
Same suburb.
All right, well, that's a damn good start. So, you know, calling it out, you're not always going to get comparables that good. And I know one of the questions that will come up is, okay, well, what do I do when there's not enough comparables? You can extend it in a couple of different ways. You can extend your area, your physical area, and then if you can look at comparables in all the surrounding suburbs, you can build a story for where value would be in the suburb you're looking. The other thing to do is expand vertically, I guess I would call it, in terms of if you've got a 300 square metre block, look at 400s, look at 500s, look at 200s, look at 250s, and again, find where value sits in that area. If it's houses, let's say yours is 3-bed, 1 bath. Okay, look at 4-bed, 1 bath, look at 4-bed, 2 bath, look at 3-bed, 2 bath, look at all those different variables, and again, walk in the buyer's shoes. If I was a buyer, where would I see value for this property? And, you know, always sit on the conservative side and do what we're doing today. So anyone that I'm working with, any of my students, this is what we do. They've got to convince me of their sales numbers, because it's very easy, especially once you know your costs, it's very easy to unintentionally doctor your sales numbers to make the feasibility work. If you can't convince someone else of the numbers, probably not a deal to be done. So, and I still do this to myself as well. So just so you know, that's not something I think you should stop doing, because it's a big decision when you get into a deal. And if you've doctored the numbers to make the deal work, then you're in for a hell of a lot of pain for the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, whatever it is, until you get out the other side. And think of all the opportunity cost, all the great deals you could have done in that space. Do good deals, do great deals. Don't try and do lots of deals at the expense of the quality. So we'll go have a look at this property first, and let's start now. Just so we know, what did you have in your feasibility so far for the 300 square metre block?
I believe it was around 450 grand.
Okay, cool. Oh, actually, now one thing we didn't look at while we were here was driveway access. Now, I did mention street trees. Standing here looking now, I can see we do have enough room. We do have a sign here. We do have these trees. We've got a speed bump down in front of the car. But if we're only splitting this into 2 blocks to start with, then we've got plenty of room up towards that other boundary. So yeah, up that way, plenty of room there for another driveway. Now, splitting it into 3, that could be a little bit trickier because we've got street trees, we've got a signpost, we've got a speed bump. That's something we wouldn't know for sure without surveying the site. And we've also got a drain down near the front as well. So that's something we wouldn't know without surveying the site. Because the other thing we need to consider here too is we need off-street parking for the existing house. Because currently the carport is actually on what we are going to create as a new block. So somewhere along the line we need to create a new car park off-street for this house. I don't know that on the main road is going to be possible. I don't think there's enough enough distance from the house to the footpath. So my guess is it's going to have to tuck in behind the house. So then we also need access for that as well.
So you're saying there need to be a way to get in here?
Yeah, I would guess that that's most likely where it's going to be, which that could be interesting because we've got that speed bump. We've got the drain. Let's just go down a little bit here and have a look.
So in which case the deck would have to go?
I'm thinking across the back of the property, just going straight in.
Right.
So we can spin around there. Now, the problem with that is we've got a street tree right there and we've got a speed bump that we're sitting on top of right now. Now, whether or not they allow a driveway to come out on a speed bump, can't say I've experienced that one in the past, so that's something we would need to look at. The street tree is not too significant, so I would expect that we can probably get permission to remove that. If need be, we may need to move the driveway a bit further, which may mean it ends up not being 200-300 square metre blocks. Maybe it ends up being slightly larger on the house, slightly smaller on the block of land. Those are all things we can confirm once the site is surveyed.
Could that...
That's right. Yep, keep going. I'm just having a look.
Could that make the project not feasible from the off-street parking of this house?
Oh, look, if you can't provide off-street parking, yes, absolutely, because they won't approve a subdivision if you can't provide off-street parking.
And what makes you think we can't do it at the front?
We'll go there in a second, but I'm just looking here too. There's nothing to say you actually can't have an entrance here and then go in at a slight angle behind the house. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a straight line.
Okay.
So I think there's a solution here regardless. Something we need to confirm, but I'm quite confident that we've got a solution there. The reason I don't believe that it's possible at the front here is because from the front of the house to the front boundary, I would say is maybe 6 or 7 metres. And from my recollection in this council, your undercover car parking actually can't begin until 6 metres into the block. Now, I'd have to double check the rules on what it is if it's not undercover. So that may still be a possibility, but that's something we need to confirm. So all things we've got to look at. So and I guess what I'm hoping you get from this too is, notice I don't know all the answers off the top of my head. What you get better at is knowing the questions to ask and then knowing who to get those answers from. And some people do retain all this information in their head. Oh, car coming, I'll just move. Some people do retain all this information in their head. I'm not one of them. I retain a lot of information in my head, but my view on this is that's what I've got my experts for. Because if I try and retain every single bit of information, every little bit of code and all the rest of it, I would say that's using up a lot of my brain space for the granular detail that I've got my experts for. Others may disagree, that's fine, that's the way I operate, is I've got my experts and that's what I rely on them for. So I know I need to figure out, I need to talk to them about, do we have an appropriate solution for off-street parking?
That's the town planner?
That's for the town planner and potentially the engineer, depending on where services are, but we'll start with the town planner. Yep.
Right.
All right, so let's plug in this address and we'll go to this first one. Yeah, so I really actually hope that helps some of you get some comfort in that. I know when I was getting started, being a details person and needing to know how everything works, it was very difficult for me to get started because I wanted all of the answers before I got started. I wanted to know exactly how everything was going to play out. I needed the recipe.
So
now,
perfection, I think it's pretty common. Everyone wants that perfection from the start.
yeah, absolutely, and it's getting that comfort. You know, you exposing yourself to a risk. You can't say development doesn't have risks, and you want to mitigate that risk, and that's absolutely fine. The thing to realize though is you never get to a point. Actually, just worth spinning around here. We've got 2 houses getting built here. It'd be worth looking in. This is literally around the other side of the same block. It'd be worth having a look if those were subdivided and sold as land, or even if they were sold as house and land packages, what the house and land packages were sold for, because we can then reverse engineer those and determine roughly the land value. So all things to look at when we go around. You'll find a lot more going around than you will online because there's a data lag. Really, if you're relying on the data that's online, you're 6 to 9 months behind, and that's a huge amount when the market moves. Yeah, back to what I was saying is you're not going to get that perfection. It is perfectly okay not to have all the answers, but for each site, don't rest until you've got the answers that you need to know that you've reduced your risk enough. Like if there's things that are like go, no go, well, you don't buy a site if there's a potential, if you're aware of a potential thing that may kill the development. At no point do you take on a development where you can see a potential outcome that is a loss. You just don't do it. But those things that I've just raised now, I don't know the answers to them now, but I know where I'm going to get the answers. And there are plenty of sites that I've walked away from where I'm fairly confident that I'm going to get a favourable outcome. But if I can't lock that outcome down in time before I'm required to go unconditional, sometimes you just got to walk away. And that's happened plenty of times where we've got a site under due diligence and it's there's answers we need and they're not willing to give us any more time on due diligence and we just need to walk away. You'll find a lot of vendors are reasonable because if you explain it in a way that they see, oh, any other buyer is going to find this same thing. Like, I'll give you an example. I've had ones where there's a question as to whether the sewer capacity in the area was sufficient. Well, every buyer is going to come up across that if they're going to develop. So it doesn't make any sense for them to terminate your contract and not give you the time to find out because everyone's going to need to know that answer. They'd be better off negotiating with you going, well, look, and you could use this as an example. If you let me do this, regardless of whether I go ahead, I'll share this information with you so they then have the value add as well. Now, we've turned up. That was a very, very short drive, and I could not have asked for a better example. Okay, how long is that video going for so far?
We're at 3 minutes.
We've driven for 3 minutes, and I drove slow because I was talking. This is just around the corner. So on a map, you would look at this and you would go, wow, great comparable, fantastic comparable. It's only a couple of blocks away. But now let's get out of the car and have a look at the neighborhood that we're in, and let's see if you still think it's comparable. All right, what do you see, guys? Now, if you're watching this on YouTube afterwards, I still want you to pop it in the comments. Get interactive, get involved in this. What do you see? Does this look comparable to you, to the neighbourhood we just came out of? We are, I think, 3 blocks away. We are only 3 minutes away, but this is a brand new housing estate. These houses are schmick, brand new. New footpaths, new streets, everything is brand new. And here is the block that we are comparing to. So let's look at the factors here. All right, is it comparable in terms of quality of stock? No, miles apart. We've got a block of land, which yes, same suburb, yes, kilometres wise, very close, maybe not even a kilometre away. But the surroundings are very, very different. As a buyer, I'm walking here going, wow, I've got brand new houses next to me. My experience of living here is very different. There's new lawns, there's new landscaping, there's new fences, there's new everything. This is a beautiful new housing estate. So that is immediately a big notch down for ours. So what did this one sell for?
450 6 months ago.
Okay, so this sold for 450 6 months ago. And at the moment we have 450 in the feasibility. Now let's see after this one where we think we would sit. All right, now straight off the bat, you would have to say based on the area, you would go, not a chance. It's just not the same. But the other thing we have to factor in is the time. It is 6 months ago. What has happened in the market in that 6 months? So that sold in March. and we are now in September. Well, it would depend. It would depend on the market and what has happened in that time. So we are recording this in September of 2024. Now, to give you just a very small, I guess, condensed version, 2020, obviously we had COVID. 2021, the market went absolutely crazy because we had all that debt pumped into the market. The more money that gets pumped into the market, it eventually ends up in the land. Now, it does require sentiment. It does require other things to happen. So it tends to boil up for a while and then explode, which is what happened in 2021. Mid of 2022, the market peaked, and then it got very depressed. It got really depressed. There was talks of, going into recessions, and maybe we did go into a recession. And anyway, the market, it didn't tank in terms of values, but in terms of volume of sales it did. And in certain areas, the pricing did take a big hit as well. But then towards the end of 2023, the market started to pick up slightly again. Beginning of 2024, which is the year we are in now, land quietly started to move quite nicely again in the affordable price ranges. So land below 500,000, which this is now. So this sold in March. In March, things were only just starting to elevate. They're beginning to elevate. Now in September, again, this is experience because I'm in the market. I released 15 blocks in Burpengary, which is an inferior suburb to here, but I sold out 15 blocks in a couple of weeks, and I could have sold them 5 times over. Now, the media is not reporting this stuff at the moment. If you ask the media, the market is humming along. In fact, CoreLogic is putting out data suggesting that the growth is slowing down and all those sorts of things. Now, the data is correct, but you've got to remember that there's a data lag, and the data needs to be interpreted. You need to actually look at the whole picture set, because there are different segments of the market. There is completed stock, there is land, there is also different pricing brackets. Now, I just sold stuff a few weeks ago for 25% more than what I was selling it for in October. So 12 months ago, 25% less than what I just sold stuff for now. So am I going to say that this is going to be 25% higher now? No, I'm not, because this was sold in March. And we're a slightly higher price bracket as well. But what I am saying is we can't ignore the fact that the market has shifted significantly. So if this sold for 450 in March, this would be selling for a lot more than 450 now. What that number is, I don't know exactly yet, but that's where we start. We start and go, okay, this sold for 450 in March. At a guess, I would say that this would probably be hitting high 4s at least now. We know that some stuff in Bald Hills, 300 square metre blocks have sold over 500,000. Bald Hills, I'd say, is a bit superior to here, but even those sales are a few months old now. So it's very conceivable to think that this could be selling for high 4s now, maybe even tipping into the 5s, which, based just on that information, might mean that our 450 in the feasibility for our block may now be reasonable. I'm not saying I'm concluding that, but maybe, because this would definitely be going for more than 450 now, which means maybe ours would be going, or I should say Michael's would be going for 450 in this market, potentially. Let's go collect some more information. Michael, anything you're noticing while you're out here, and any questions that come up from this?
No, it's pretty obvious. The look and feel of the area is completely different. Definitely a better piece of land. So I think taking that for what it is, considering the market's moved up, around 500 seems conceivable, which means for my place, 450 might still be on the money, but we'll have to look at a few more.
Now, big question is, was the difference between this block and your block this obvious when you were looking online?
No, because the picture is literally a block of land. You don't see anything else around us at all.
Yep. Yeah. So if you were to go and buy that property, let's say this was in the same market right now, like this had just sold for 450, and you were to go and buy that property and get into that deal based on that data you're seeing online, going, oh, well, 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away, less than a kilometre away, sold for 450, right, oh, it's the same thing. Well, you're probably going to lose money on that side over there. It's not the same. You need to get out here, you need to walk around, you need to feel it. And this is what we talk about, market expertise. Because if you're an expert in your suburb, you would know this before even coming out. That's the thing. This is where reverse engineering. We're doing this as though you don't know your area. Whereas the way I'll teach you, you know your area before you'd be doing this sort of thing. So the moment the property pops up, you already know all this stuff. You're like, oh, well, that one sold for 450, but it's a better area. That one's going to go for this, X, Y, Z. But because we don't know that now, I'm going through the process with you, and that's how we figure that out. So we've got this one here, solid comparable, but not really comparable in terms of quality. So that's where we are at the moment. All right, so what we're going to now is a comparable of the property as it is. So as though we were going to look at selling the site, just got to pay attention to where I'm going here, selling the site as is. Now, do I expect that that's going to be necessarily the best exit? Probably not. You know, land has moved a nice amount in recent times, so I think it's going to be worth developing it. But make informed decisions. If you find yourself sitting there thinking, oh, if, but, when, what if, you know, all that sort of stuff, get out there. Stop sitting there in the world of I don't know, and get out there and find the information you need to make an informed decision. So what Michael did really well here is, even though originally when he bought this, he had no intention of developing it. He always just intended to get exposure to land and to hold on to it for a while. So he made a smart decision there, in that he made the choice to, well, he spoke with me and we identified a good quality development site that he could then hold. Why? Because holding a development site is going to appreciate better than just buying a standard house, because you've got a larger land component. Not necessarily you've got more land, but you've got a higher density. There's more utility to the land. So if you've got a 600 square meter property that can't be developed versus a 600 square meter property that can be developed, well, that's going to appreciate more because it's got more exposure to the land market because of its utility. And land is what goes up, not the dwelling on it. So that's something Michael did really well. So we need to look at the possibility that, you know, if we're looking at most amount of money, least amount of time, least amount of risk, least amount of aggravation, well, maybe selling it as it is fits that recipe. I don't know. That's why we're doing the research. Let's not guess. So this one here is an existing dwelling on a 600 square meter block. So let's have a look at it. Which number is it?
Number 33. 3-bed, 1-bath house. And as you'll see, I'd say it's in a worse area, which we'll get to in a moment. That's the train line right there.
Yep. So we won't get out of this one. Okay, so look, property, the dwelling itself is probably comparable. I mean, look, it's brick, but both of them are pretty sad. It is directly across from the train line. So you want to be close to the train line. You don't want to be too close. This is too close. So generally speaking, properties that are directly on a train line are going to sell for about 10% less than a comparable property not on the train line. So what did this sell for?
This sold for $745,000 in May, so a few months ago.
So 745. So if we said the 10% rule, so comparable to Michael's would maybe be 830 for Michael's. Very rough numbers. We're just sort of bouncing things around here to sort of see where the value sits. I'm just going to move off the road here because there's a bike coming. Now, the other thing is Michael's definitely has the development advantage, because while this property is also zoned next generation, I believe.
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah.
Okay. Big difference. Okay. But even if this one was, so this is something to consider. Even if this property was zoned the same, so theoretically could be developed, it's not the same thing. Michael's being a corner block, the house can be retained and a new block can be cut off. Free block of land strategy. This one here, the only way to access the development potential, if it had the zoning, would be to demolish the house. Now, general rule of thumb is it only makes sense to demolish a house if it's going to give you an additional 2 blocks. So a 1 into 3 is an example. So let's say as it is, you can't get any additional blocks, but if you demolish the house, you can turn it from 1 block into 3. That might be worth demolishing the house. If you're demolishing the house to get a 1 into 2, the house really has to have very little to no value left in it, which typically means it needs to be in pretty poor condition, or the land really has to have moved so that there's that disparity between what land value is and what established dwellings are selling for. So based purely on this comparison, you might say, look, Michael's as it is, 830, 850. Again, it's also a few months ago, but Michael's is developable. This is not. Even if it was, Michael, you can keep the house and develop. Plus, this one is right on the train line. So based on that alone, Michael's would have to be in the 8s, maybe around the mid-8s, which, mate, be a pretty damn tidy profit. What did you buy it for?
$275.
$275. Selling for mid-8s. That's,
Not bad.
That's not bad. Not bad at all. And that's the difference when you buy a quality development site. If we did the math there on the cash on cash return for Michael, as in what actual cash he put in to buy it, and the return he's got on that on only a few years because he bought a quality development site instead of just buying a normal property, that's a great recipe for wealth creation.
And probably a conversation for another day. But I was able to borrow 105%, so there's zero cash put in, and use the extra funds to do the cosmetic reno at the beginning. But that can be another series on renovating.
Oh, we will definitely have that conversation. That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. All right, so we're off to our next comparable. Now this is another established house, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep. Cool.
600 square metre block, 3-bed, 1-bath house.
Okay. So if we just pause on what we've done so far, Michael, what are your takeaways so far? What are your thoughts so far? What are you getting out of it?
Well, looking at this house here, being a subpar location, a better house structure, I would say, it's giving a bit of food for thought for selling it as is and not going through the development if that kind of premium can be put on the end sale. But very early days. I think we just have a look at another one to really gauge that a bit better.
Yeah. And I guess now being out here driving past here, what's your level of confidence in? Because what number have you got in, what number had you worked on the past in terms of being able to sell it as is?
Well, I've had a ring around to a few agents just recently to get some numbers, and they were saying at least around the 750.
Right, now having seen that sold for 750, that sold for 750, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, what level of confidence do you have in that number now, having actually been out to this property?
Yeah, very high level of confidence.
Yeah. Now, the things we do need to consider, sort of to, I guess, knock it back down a notch, is we don't know what the inside of that property looks like, although if it's sold recently, we should be able to see photos online. So, we need to make sure that it is comparable in that regard. It's brick. Now, a brick home is always going to realise a higher price than a timber home, which Michael's is. And as we know, there are some stumping issues and bits and pieces with the property as it is as well, which you can be pretty confident that they would come up in a building and pest. So those are all things we've got to look at as well. So that will be some further research to do on that comparable, is to look at the photos online, see what it's like inside. So actually have a look at how comparable is the dwelling itself, because in this case here we're looking at a comparable of selling it as it is. Is the house a larger footprint? Well, it is brick, we know that much. Does it have more bedrooms, bathrooms, or more utility areas, whatever it is? So that's something we still need to look at. So my assumption that Michael's is worth mid-8s based on that one has still got some very big caveats in it.
Yep, I think that's fair to say.
Now this is a bit of a trip down memory lane. So here's the lesson, guys, in failing fast. So I think we are. So if you look over here, that brick house there, I think it is, and that one there, we'll just go down here a bit further. Just check that I'm giving you the right information. Yeah, this corner block here, and those two properties back there, when I first got started, there was a zoning change, and I was seeing dollar signs, and I ran out here and I was trying to option up everything I possibly could, because a lot of this got rezoned to a zoning that allowed the construction of units. So I just went hell for leather, saw an opportunity and went optioning up everything, trying to put together a good unit development site. And there I actually succeeded. I managed to get 3 properties all adjoining, optioned them all up, and thought, I'm rich. I'm headed to the bank. So what I did not understand at the moment, at that point in time, that was my first year of development, still very green, was the values in this area were nowhere near high enough to actually justify the construction cost of units. And now here we are almost 10 years later, and there are still no units in this area. But let's have a look at that for a second in terms of failing fast. And I guess I'm sharing this with you for you to realize that while you see the stuff that I do now, that didn't come without making mistakes and trial and error and all the rest of it. So, just keep that in mind. Cut yourself some slack. Give yourself a break. You've got to be willing to get out there and try it. Look, what did I spend on that? I don't know. I probably spent $3 to $5 grand on legals, I think I gave them each a $1,000 deposit or something like that. So let's say it cost me $8,000. Was I happy about giving up $8,000? No, but I now knew how to negotiate option agreements. I got a in practice experience with options agreements. I've since used that knowledge to broker and negotiate multiple other deals, which have made me hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So, the key is get out there, try. When it doesn't work, dust yourself off, go again. It's only a failure and it was only a cost, or a stop there, and you don't allow that learning to be something you leverage in the future. So just remember that. Cut yourself some slack.
There we go.
There we are. Is that on there? Yeah, there we are. Okay, so again, we're not going to hop out here again, but we've got another low set brick. Again, very plain, very tired property. Oh, car coming. But it is a brick place. And it does have, that's something for the other one as well, it does have a garage. So, those are all things that are positives to the property. It's in a quieter location. It's not on a thoroughfare, all those sorts of things. So what did this one sell for?
This sold for less. So it's in a better position than the previous one, I'd say. Sold for $726,000 and more recently, only in July.
Okay. All right. Now, key to notice there, though, is May, July. When this one sold, now, again, we don't know the insides of these properties. We've got to look at that online. So there's other elements to this. But you can't just go, oh, well, this one sold a month later and it sold for less, so we need to take that as gospel. It's a month later. The sale in May was more than likely not published yet, or certainly not visible necessarily to everyone. So that's where you get these discrepancies in the market, is where sales are not published yet. So based on the knowledge they had at the time, this may have seemed like a good price. You also don't know the motivations of the seller and all that sort of stuff. So there's a whole lot of other bits to that story that you need to put together. It's the context that you need to remember for each of these things. You can't just take the pure data point. So, all right, so set brick, in a location, than Michael's, that throws some doubt at the mid-8 number, for Michael's as is. Fair bit of doubt. But again, we need to look at the other information that's available. All right, where are we off to now?
Next up, we've got some houses on 300 square metre lots.
Ah, good.
We have Graham's Road, Strathpine, number 80.
Awesome. All right, moving on to the next one. So, Michael, your thoughts after seeing that one?
Yeah, it definitely puts a spanner in the works with getting an 8 in front of the property and maybe even a 7. And you see something like that in a better location, better house being brick, and only in low 7s a couple of months ago. So,
yeah, and something that some people might throw up as a question is, oh, well, isn't that worth something because it could be raised? Look, that's really grasping at straws. The fact is, being a low set brick, structurally significantly more sound, lower maintenance costs, and just generally is a better quality dwelling because it's a low set brick versus an old timber one like Michael's up on stumps, and stumps which we know need work. So yeah, when people try and sell things on the future potential, that tends to only really work a lot in hot markets, when people are just being greedy and there's that fear of missing out. Ultimately, you're selling what there is now, and what Michael has now is a low set timber on stumps that need work. That's tired. That's what's being sold now. So
is now a hot market, would you say?
Now's not a hot market for existing dwellings, no.
Okay.
There are segments that are moving, and there are signals saying that potentially could move further into established dwellings, but it's a very segmented market at the moment. There are areas where incredible things are happening, but then there are areas where it's when I say hot market, I just FOMO is everywhere, and you could put a steaming turd on the market and people will buy it. Like, that's what happens in a hot market. People do crazy and stupid things, and they're just so desperate to get in the market because It's moving so fast that the fear of missing out clouds their judgment, and they figure that the market is just going to forgive all sins because it'll keep going up. Generally, when the market reaches that point, it's about to tip over, because you've got to remember the data is always lagging. So by the time the media tells everyone it's a hot market, those that were in the market already bought at the best time and are now just riding the wave and are probably planning their exit. So be very, very mindful of that. Okay, what are we looking at here, mate?
So here we have a house on a small lot. It sold in July, end of July, for $782,000. The reason I put a couple of these comparables together was because they're very nearby to what we're already looking at, but also just for a bit of context for what a house on a small lot would sell for, despite it being a newer house. I think you're going to be stretched to find a old house on a 300 square meter block just because of the zoning rules. That was only relatively recently. Before that, everything was on a 600 square meter lot. So this is a slightly older build. I'd say it's probably when the zoning first changed, these all got split up and built on.
Yep.
And that's probably where it's at. So it's a 3-bed, 2-bath house, comparable in terms of specs, but definitely not comparable in terms of build. But it's interesting to see what a new, I guess, newish house on 300 lot would go for.
Yeah, you're spot on, and especially when you're in an area where there's not as many data points, not as many comparables, often you do need to do this sort of stuff and actually start working backwards from established stock. So how would we do that in this instance here? So like you pointed out, it's not a brand new build. It's probably a few years old. That's something we could figure out pretty quickly by going to, if you've got a subscription to like a land checker or what's it called?
RP data or something.
No, RP data doesn't normally have the historical. I'm drawing a blank on it right now, but anyway, anything where you've got a historical satellite imagery. So where you can click back to various dates where they've got satellite imagery from that date. So then you can establish pretty quickly, okay, it was built in 2020, 2021, because in 2019 it was still vacant land. So we'd want to have a look at how old that is. Now let's just say it's a couple of years old. What would be the difference in price if that was to sell now, brand new? So let's pretend that was built and is now on the market. Well, if it's brand new, if you were to throw a number at it, you would say it's probably going to sell for about 100 grand more than one that is a couple of years old. Now, we're talking rough numbers. That's not something you take to the bank. This is all just, again, trying to build the context. So if that sold in July for 782,000, if that was selling in July as a brand new property, it probably would have sold for 880, 900,000 at a guess. All right, so that's what we've got to now reverse engineer to go, all right, well, what would it cost to build that home? And therefore, what does that leave in our land? Okay, now, again, we don't know much about this property, but we could find that out online. But I'm going to throw a number at it and just say that it's going to cost you about 300,000 to build a dwelling like that. Now, given the size of it, that may be overshooting the mark, but let's just work on that. It's about the methodology right now. So if I'm saying, and I'm going to make it round numbers to make it easy, if I'm saying that this today brand new would sell for 900,000, which we'd be able to figure out pretty quickly by looking at other house and land packages around the area, and it was going to cost 300,000 to do it. Okay, take 300,000 off 900, brings us back to 600,000. Now, typically people want to see some uplift when they build. You know, you don't build a brand new home to have it valued at the end at exactly what it cost you to build. So normally people want to see about a $100,000 uplift if we're going to throw a number at it. So that would argue that that land was worth about 500. Does that make sense? So 500 for the land, 300 for the build, 800, 100 for the uplift, 900. That's kind of the way you work it backwards. So that would loosely value that land at 500,000. Now, if you just have a look up and down the street, Michael, is this comparable to your land?
No, it's a much newer area on one side of the street, but the other side of the street is a bit older.
Yep, spot on. So it's actually not a bad comparable, because you're right. On this side of the street, on Michael's side, all older properties, very, very similar to Michael's area. This side of the street, brand new housing estate. But now, if that block was smack bang in the middle of the brand new estate, probably would have sold for more. So this is pretty damn good in the sense that it's across the road from established stock, old stock, and those numbers are suggesting that that land in July was valued at approximately 500,000, which if we were then to say we were working on 450 for Michael's, roughly a 10% discount because of the quality of the location, right? That 450 number is still holding some merit, right? Because we had the 450 comparable from March before the market had really moved much in the land space. We've now got this suggesting in July, this being valued around 500, which again adds more weight to us suggesting the first land comparable we looked at, if it was sold today, might sell for high fours to around 5. So you can see these pieces of the puzzle are starting to sort of fit in together. But again, all of these houses, we need to know more about them. That's something from homework for Michael to do. Really what he's doing there is just to see, is there anything that jumps up that throws a spanner in the assumptions we're making right now? We don't really care every granular detail of the house. It's just having a look at it going, does anything here smell off? Or does the story starting to fit together? All right, so the next one we're going to is another relatively new house on an even smaller block, on a terrace lot, on 225 square meters. Now, incidentally, we're now turning into this new estate that we were just looking at. So this one is going to be in the middle of this new housing area. So in terms of location, far superior in location, at least in the quality. You've got to be careful with the location comment because you've still got to look at how close you are to amenities and all that sort of thing. But in terms of the quality of the housing, it's far superior. This one sold in August. We're in September now. So this only sold a month ago for 700,000. And this is only on 225 square meters. And it's a low set, which means this is a very small footprint house. So here we go. Okay. All right. And look, the house is not much chop at all. That is a very, very basic, really affordable housing play there. So of that $700,000 price, most of that value is in the land. And straight off the bat, I've got to say that's kind of adding more weight to what I was suggesting before about the other block of land being valued at around 500,000. Because if we look at this one here, look, maybe this house costs 250,000 to build, maybe. So if it's sold for 750, take off the 700. Sold for 700, take off the 250, we're down to 450. Now, slightly lower price point, you can't kind of keep that 100 grand margin as you go further down as well. So look, that's maybe saying, what did I say, 450? Yeah, look, maybe valuing this land here at 400, high threes with a $50,000 to $80,000 uplift for whoever built it. So if this land here is worth high 3s to 4, it's 225 square meters. Look, starting to get some support around that 450 mark for Michael's land, because 225 square meter terrace lot versus a 300 square meter block with a nicer frontage. And that's something Michael does have going for him, is the frontage of his new block would be quite significant. The downside of Michael's is it's not very deep, but because it's still a 300 square meter block, there's a decent footprint there where they can build a nice low set home. That's in affordable housing areas, that's a big plus when you can stay low set. Because if you have to go high set, you immediately add a considerable cost to the build, which kind of goes against the whole reason why people are buying in those areas, for it to be affordable. So you tend to be overcapitalizing. So ideally, you want them to be able to build low set where you can make that possible if you're in affordable areas. 700,000 for, was it 3 bed, 1 bath?
2 bath.
3 bed, 2 bath. Far out, they've squeezed that in. Well done. Creative architects, good job. On 225 square meters. So again, if I say the house costs 250 to build, back to 450, allowing a margin there suggests 400 for the land value. Seems reasonable. What are your thoughts, mate?
Yeah, I mean, echo what you're saying. I think when you work it out per square meter, it seems to make sense.
Yeah. And the conversations we're having now, it's going to be similar conversations to what an agent that is good is going to have with buyers as well. So again, you've got to walk in the buyer's shoes. Like if you can't justify the price logically, how are they going to? If they're not going to be able to justify it logically, there's got to be a really big emotional driver to have them basically ignore the logic. And if you don't have that, it's going to fall back to logic. So you've got to be able to get some logic behind the numbers. You've got to build that context. Okay, so the next one we're going to is much less of a comparable because it's in a neighbouring suburb. It's 266 square metres. Now, we questioned whether it was worth going to see it, but I believe it is worth it. Because number one, it's only 10 minutes away, and so let's just get that extra data point. Number two, it's either going to give us a floor or a ceiling in respect to if that is a superior suburb, then yeah, that may give us a ceiling on our land. Because if we're trying to sell something in an inferior suburb, as an example, and a product in a better suburb has sold for XYZ, well, it makes it harder to justify our price. So yeah, that's something to look for. Is if you're looking at the neighbouring suburb and it's an inferior suburb, that could give you a price floor, in the sense that it's like, all right, well, if that's sold there, ours has to sell for more than that. Or if it's a better suburb, if this property sold in the better suburb for X price, it'd be a very good reason for our property to sell for the same or more. So that's where this data point could be very useful. All right, so we're rocking up at our last comparable. So this one is in a different suburb. It's in Launton. Tell us what we got here, Michael.
Yeah, just some vacant lots of land in, I guess, a newish development. It's not really that comparable, but in terms of just some land sales, there's really not that much to look at, which is why we're taking a look at this place here. On paper, I would have thought Launton is a subpar area. I spoke with a couple of land sales agents who also said the same thing, but where we are at the moment doesn't really feel that way. But yeah, just going to look at some 230 square metre up to 290 square metre lots.
So out of interest, why do you say this doesn't feel subpar?
I think mainly just because it's newer and fresher.
Yep.
That's the main thing. In terms of amenities, it is further away from everything.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So yeah, quality, I see what you mean. So in terms of quality of dwellings around it, it's far superior because it's a new estate. But that new estate is in an inferior location.
Yep.
Now just poke your head, just have a look down here. So notice these guys here, see how it's on a concrete driveway? Now, but then you've actually got houses in there. What this is a community title scheme. So it's not townhouses. They will be freehold properties. They'll all have their own title and they'll have their own block of land. But what there more than likely is a body corporate over some shared facilities, which may just be the driveway. But that's something to be mindful of because some councils won't allow multiple properties to come off one single driveway unless you do a community title scheme. And the reason for that being is if they all share the same driveway, what happens when it cracks? What happens when there's work to be done? And councils that haven't done it that way in the past now have all these disputes on their hands or driveways that just don't get maintained because some residents want to do something to it, some don't. So that's what you're looking at there. Now, in this particular council, in Moreton Bay, that's a pretty common thing because it's the only way to do a land development with multiple properties off one driveway. But it is seen as a slight negative because you do have a body corporate. And as soon as you involve the word body corporate, people go, oh, I've got an ongoing cost each year. That being said, it's typically pittance relative to what you would pay in a townhouse complex, where there's a lot more shared facilities and a lot more shared costs. Whereas here, it's a very nominal figure typically, but it's still seen as a slight negative. So if you've got land that's on a community title scheme versus land that has no community title scheme, there's going to be a slight differential in price. Maybe say 5%. It used to be 10%. I think that gap is bridging a little bit now because people are starting to realise there's not much cost involved in it and it's becoming much more normal as land is becoming more scarce and kind of just got to take what's available in some cases. All right, so what do we got here? We got, how big is the block of land?
There's 4 lots that all sold in March, April of this year.
Yep.
They range between 227 and 266 square metres. And
Yep.
they sold between 340 to 399.
Okay, so let's break that down for starters now. If you just pan around, have a look. So this is all very new. All right, we've got a lot of vacant blocks here. They're starting to build one property next to us here, but most of these are still not built. So this is, really quite new. Now, it is part of a new housing estate, so it's surrounded by quality product. It's surrounded by nice trees, so it has a really nice feel to it. So those are all things we need to take into consideration. Now let's have a look at the numbers. I'm just going to pull over here.
59.
All right, so we've got 227 square metres, which I presume that's what sold for 340,000. Is that the case?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So much smaller block of land. That's about 20% smaller than the block that we're looking at bringing if we do it as a 1 into 2. Or obviously still looking at the 1 into 3 option where we'd be doing 200 square metre blocks of land, slightly larger. Now, the time frame, March and April. Now, like we talked about, especially in the affordable land market, there's been quite a shift from March to April. Now, again, you will not find that in the media. That is only known by people that are in the market and that are selling stuff today, that have got their finger on the pulse of what is actually happening, what contracts are being negotiated as we speak, contracts that have been signed but then fallen over, contracts that have gone unconditional but haven't settled. There's this whole world of other data that you are not privy to if you are just sitting behind your computer. You only know that stuff if you are out here walking around, if you are talking to agents, if you're talking to land marketers. That's where you find that intel, being on the ground. So let's go to the bigger end if we're doing the comparable of the 300 square metre block. So 266 square metre block of land sold for, we'll just call it 400,000 in March to April. Now again, there's been a fair shift since March to April, so you might say that might be maybe 10% more in today's market. So let's say it was a $440,000 sale in today's market for 266 square metres, which again, look, superior quality area, inferior location. So yeah, look, again, that's adding more support for that mid-4s area for Michael's land. And then if we were looking at the 200 square metre option, okay, well, if they're 227 square metres sold for 340,000, okay, maybe that's now, maybe in today's market, that would be selling for 360, 370 potentially. If we're bringing a 200 square metre block of land to the market, okay, you might be looking at a comparable number, give or take. So again, this is all just adding to that context that we're looking for in terms of that value. I think what we're seeing is adding a fair amount of confidence to, actually I'm not going to say the number, Michael, from what you've been looking at, and what we've gone through today, where do you think your block of land sits?
I think around that 450 is pretty comfortable.
Okay.
I think that's very achievable. And I'm cheating a little bit here because I just remembered I had what the land sales agents said at the top.
Don't let that corrupt your thinking.
And they are saying 480 to 500 for my lot. But I mean, they are agents, so they're probably going to say a high figure to try and get the listing.
Yep. Look, the thing though is, they might be right, and that's fine. That may be the number that we go for. Remember, when you're doing your feasibilities though, you are not putting in there what you might get. That's a really crucial point. You're not putting in your feasibility what you might get. You're putting in your feasibility what you know you can get. So I always use the grandmother example. If your grandmother was investing, and this is a grandmother you love dearly, if she was investing with you, what is the number that you would tell her that you know you can deliver? All right, well, based on what we've seen today, forget your agents, what's the number you know you can deliver?
I think we can get 450. I don't know for sure, but I think that 450 number is achievable.
All right, so you'd be comfortable sitting with your grandmother, your nonna, and saying, Nonna, your money is safe.
I'd under promise and over deliver, so maybe 425.
All right, okay, but this is good. See, as soon as you bring the emotion in, you become accountable for the numbers. See how your number shifts?
Yep.
Yeah, that's why I use the grandmother thing. All right, my grandmother's long gone, but I loved my grandmother, and there's no way in heck I would ever put her stuff at risk. And that's what I encourage you to do, is put some emotion behind it, put some accountability behind it, so it stops being a number on the sheet, because these numbers on the sheet represent changes in your life for the positive or the negative. Don't forget that. And if you've got investors in place, their lives. But even if you don't, it's going to impact the people around you. Even if you're single and you don't have a family around you, trust me, when you're doing well financially and you've got money flowing in, you are a much better person to those around you, rather than if you are feeling tight and if you're scringing and not feeling affluent. So make no mistake, these numbers make a difference to your life. So figure out a way to get the emotion there in terms of accountability, not the greed emotions. Cool. All right. So your grandmother number, your feasibility number then is 425.
Yep, let's do that.
And look, I think personally, from what we've seen today, I think that's very conservative. I do actually think that's very much on the comfortable side, but that's good. All right. So yeah, I would have probably sat around the mid fours, feeling pretty comfortable around the mid fours. But again, this is after years of selling land. Obviously, my gauge, I would suspect, I'd hope, is probably a little bit more finely tuned. So it's natural for you to then take another little step off to find that level of comfort, which is, I'd prefer that than going the other way. All right, so is that our last comparable?
That's it.
All right, so basically from today, what we're seeing is that the land will go into the feasibility between 425 to 450. It's up to Michael where he puts that. And the actual house itself on a 300 square meter block of land.
Well, we have one. There's not many, because any house on a 300 square metre lot is relatively new. So it's kind of hard to gauge what an older house on a 300 square metre lot would go for. I did get some feedback from some sales agents, not land sales agents, just traditional real estate agents. And they were quite confident of around that 610 to 650.
Cool. So what I would look at there in that regard, and what Mike was saying there is quite fair, in that there's not typically a lot of established dwellings on 300 square metre blocks, like older dwellings. So you then got to look at that logic test again. If we think that the block of land is worth 450, 425, may get up into the high fours, then that same block of land with an older house on it, well, what value would you attribute to that dwelling? Well, what would it cost to replace the dwelling? Well, it would cost several $100,000 to replace the dwelling, but then that would be a new house, so you can't take that price. But yeah, typically these days, even if the house is pretty ordinary, assuming the house adds 150 or so to the value of the property is normally a pretty safe guess, because the cost of construction has gone up so much. I still worked on 150 a couple of years ago before costs went ballistic, so it's probably pretty on the money to work on 200 these days. So if we're saying mid fours or so for the land, mid sixes or so for the house, or low sixes to mid sixes, that sounds about right. That passes the logic test. Might still need some more finessing around that number, but that still gives us a lot more confidence around our numbers in the feasibility. And the thing is, if the low end of both of those still looks good on the feaso, then you don't really need to go any further into your numbers, do you? But if you're needing the number to be a bit higher, then yes, you probably need to spend some more time justifying that number. But from memory, I think at 425, 450, what did we have in the feasibility the last time we looked?
I think it was 450.
Yep, and what do we have for the house?
Testing my memory, but I think around that 600 to 650.
Yep, okay. And the result there was positive?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll have a look at that. We'll continue this this episode or into the next episodes where we'll go back onto the spreadsheet and we'll look at that, and then we'll determine, do we need to do more work on those numbers, or are the numbers already good enough even if we work on the low end of the land and the house price range. Oh, before we sign off, mate, any questions from you or things you're still wondering?
No, but I mean, this really just reinforced the value of going out to site to get a feel for everything around the property, as well as the comparables.
Mm.
Yeah,
you can't replace this road trip. You have to do this. So this isn't something you want to do for every single property you look at. So number one,
really should be the expert in your area first anyway. So this is no longer necessarily required as much. It's normally just kind of a final check off, not as in depth as we've done today, because you'd already be aware of all of that stuff. You'd know all of the sales that happened. But you can't just do it from your desktop. You've got to get out here. It's an entirely different picture. And sometimes you'll see things that actually enable you to really, really significantly increase the value of the property or what you have in the fees at. Other times it'll be the opposite direction. I had one once where I was in 8 Mile Plains. Now, just listen to that word, the name of the suburb, 8 Mile Plains. You don't really think of elevated land there, do you? However, when I got up into the shack that was on there, it was definitely not a legal dwelling. It looked like something that had been banged up by maybe by a homeless person. I'm not sure. It was not a house. But even in the second level of that, which was way lower than what a proper second level would be, turns out we had city views. Who would have known? City views in 8 Mile Plains. So would I have known that prior? Absolutely not. So get out of your office, go have a look. Get confident in those numbers. If you're still sitting there guessing, you can't pull the trigger on that. That's just gambling.
Doing it cash, getting debt to fund the deal. What's your experience? What would you suggest?
Okay, so you're looking at, do you fund it with your own cash, or do you borrow to fund the construction?
Yes, for the development costs.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I mean, in one hand, it's sort of a velocity question, and what are you going to do with the money if you keep the cash available? So that's one question which I can't necessarily answer for you. In terms of how you would get debt on this sort of project, different options. So your options will be a little bit different to someone who's just bought the property today to do this deal. Because if you just bought the property today to do the deal, there wouldn't necessarily be equity that you could access from the bank. Now, I stress the point there of equity that you could access from the bank because you may have bought it 10-20% below market value as a development site. But typically trying to get a regular bank to actually recognize that value is near impossible immediately, because they will go, well, hang on, it just sold. That's determined the market value. Regardless of how much you may have bought it below market value, banks will just go, well, it just got bought. There's the contract. That's the data point. That's its market value. In 6-12 months, you might be able to refinance it and access other equity, but that's just a reality of the way the banks work. Now, next after that, you can look at second-tier lenders and third-tier lenders, where they may be more willing to recognise other value. But again, it's always going to be challenging to get a valuer to value a property a few weeks after it's just been bought for a different number than what was on the contract. That's just, unfortunately, a reality. Now, in your case, there's, depending what the debt situation is on it now, probably the easiest way to access money, and this would just be refinance on a residential loan and just access that equity.
Yep, and use the debt to fund the project.
Yep, because that would be very easy for you to do, assuming you can service the debt, because you've got so much equity in this property because of the uplift. And I would, at a guess, say that there's more than enough that you could access, which would be the cheapest money you could get to fund the development, because you're probably going to be able to get that at 6 or 7% interest rates. Now, other than that, if we assume that wasn't an option, so let's say you did buy it just today and you didn't have that amount of equity that you could pull from. So one option would be raising the capital from private investors. Market interest rates for that kind of thing are between 10 and 15%, depending on your relationships with the investors and your reputation and all those sorts of things. Other options are second-tier lenders and private money lenders, who are more likely to lend to you based on the value of the project versus it as a residential property. So if it was bought today, then it would be private investors, or you could go for a commercial facility. On this size project, probably not going to work out that well, mainly because, yes, they will recognise the end value of the project, but they're going to give you a lower LVR. So you're probably not going to get really that much out of doing that. A private money lender is going to give you a lot more money, but the thing to be mindful of there is when you read through those contracts, it's kind of like you're signing up your firstborn and your secondborn.
Yep.
Now, that being said, if you actually read your bank contracts, they're not too dissimilar, but it is a different league of money lending, so you do need to be mindful of that. It is used plentiful. I have used it, but I'm just saying that you do need to be cautious with that kind of a thing. But they will give you a much higher loan to value ratio. They will loan on the end value of the product typically, but your cost of funds goes up significantly. So depending on where the market is at the time, you're probably looking at anywhere between 11 to 18%. When you put everything together, be very cautious in that space, especially if you're speaking with a broker as well. It'll often be like, oh yeah, we start from 10%. Oh, but there's a 2% establishment fee. Oh, and there's a 1.5% line fee. Oh, and there's a risk fee. It's like, all right, well, why did you tell me 10%? It's 15% every day of the week. And there's a 1% brokerage fee. So just be mindful of that. So there's multiple options here. Definitely the simplest and cheapest option for you, if that's available to you, is to just get a investment loan from a bank.
Just a basic loan. Yep.
Yeah, you may not necessarily get that from one of the big four that's going to work, because if you go to one of those, often their policies will be you need to declare what you're using it for. Then it gives them the ability to go, we like that, we don't like that, or you need to get a financial planner to write you a report of what you're doing with the money, all that sort of stuff. Whereas then there's other lenders which will just be, okay, no worries, you can service it, you can have it. Because basically the bigger banks will often be like, well, we just want to know you're not going down to the casino and throwing it all on red.
Yep.
So you might end up paying a slightly higher interest rate, but maybe it's 7-8% versus
15%.
Yeah, or versus 6% if it's through one of the the big four as an example.
Yep.
But yeah, definitely the easiest way in this case because you've got the equity.
I guess to take a step back. So what are the next steps? We've done a desktop feasibility. We've done the comparables.
Yep.
I've organised a lot with quotes for trees, surveyors, engineering.
Yep. So next is we get back into that spreadsheet, have a look at everything, see if we're happy with the spreadsheet based on our site visit, see if there's any other big ticket items that we need to look at, see where that feasibility is sitting. If that's got enough info there, you make a decision. Is this something you want to develop? Is this something you just want to sell? And if it is something you want to develop, and if it makes sense financially to develop, then that's when we basically press the go button and we get into action. So then we engage the engineer, we engage the surveyor, we get the site surveyed, and we actually start pushing this thing forward. But so next is we jump back in the spreadsheet and ideally make a decision.
Okay, good stuff.
We'll be back. See ya.
Thanks, Pete.